So let's now go in and create some relationships in the model we just built. Okay, with this formatted a little bit, I think it's time to just talk about maybe what would be appropriate in terms of how to continue to build this data model. This sales table is not normalized, and that gives us a challenge in terms of how to implement this model or set up these relationships. So what I'm going to do is actually remove this from our model. And I'm going to create a new one called orders. So now I'm going to build this correctly so that I can have relationships here. So remember, we'll have order ID, which will be an int. We'll have order amount, let's say, which will be a decimal. We'll have order date, which will be a date. We could say estimated completion, which will also be a date. And then now let's relate it to some stuff. So the product that was sold, so we're going to add product ID, which will be an int. We'll add a customer ID, which will also be an int. And we'll have an employee ID, which will also be an int. So these last three bits here are going to join to these other tables, and it's how we're going to build out these relationships. You may have caught that I misspelled product in our product ID table there, so I'll go ahead and change that. Okay, so I'm just going to save this and have it update those tables for me. Done. Now I'm going to create a relationship here. So I can just simply drag product ID from orders over to product ID from products. Now, SQL Server wants us to enforce uniqueness when we create these joins. Otherwise, we can have a many-to-many join, which can result in something called a Cartesian product. It basically means that the tables, because they're not unique, could forever join to each other, basically eating all of our memory, crashing the server. So let's not do that. That's a bad thing. So it said, hey, you need to have a unique constraint. So we're getting a little bit deeper into SQL Server and how it works. But commonly with data models, this is how we do things. So we would have a primary key defined here for products. Now what that means is that this value must be unique. It cannot be duplicated in that table. Similarly, we'll go ahead and do this for employees, for customers, and for orders. So each one of these have a primary key. Now, since we're adding these keys after the fact, it requires SQL Server to actually drop and recreate the table. And SQL Server Management Studio out of the box won't let you do that. So what you could do is script all these changes and then run that. But rather than get into that, I'm going to show you how to get around this so that way you can do this on a continuous basis if you so choose, especially when you know what you're doing or you're this early on. It's really not very difficult, or there's not like a high degree of uncertainty or danger. So I'm going to go to Tools and Options. I'm going to go to Designers. And under Table and Database Designers, we have Prevent Saving Changes that Require Table Recreation. If I uncheck that and click OK, and now click Save, it allowed me to do it. So that's how we can get around that to make it just much easier, especially this early on when we're just building our database. We don't necessarily need to have that level of constraint in order to protect our database quite yet. Okay. So one other last thing to mention here. So I was just typing in these data types. These define the types of data that can be stored in these columns. It also helps define things like how the data is treated when you interact with it from SQL or from other programming interfaces. And we also have on the far right here, this allows nulls. This is basically saying, can this field be blank? Can it not have a value for every row? And in this case, we're going to say no to order date and order amount, but some of the other ones are allowed to be blank. Again, I'll hit save. It'll recreate that for me. Good to go. Okay, so now let's try to recreate that relationship. We have product ID here, and I'm just going to simply drag that over to product ID on top of products. And it popped up this dialog, which does the join for me or creates the foreign key relationship. So there's the primary key, which defines a table's granularity, and then there's the foreign key, which is the one that it's linked to for this relationship. It got it correctly. All of these settings here are a bit more advanced. I'm not going to get into those now, but later I'll point you where you can find those. And now look at that. We have this really interesting symbol here. And this is how SQL Server chooses to do this, where it has a little key icon and this little mini icon here. And you can click on that. You can go in and edit the relationship. You can understand how it actually works. So let's just create a couple more here. We have customer ID. Drag that over to customers. Gives me that. Good to go. Employee ID goes over to employee. There we go. There we go. So what we have now, and I'll try to fit this, apologize for the resolution, it will actually allow us to have a data model that we can join things together and we can enforce what's known as referential integrity. The system basically is protecting itself from harm by making sure that these relationships do exist. So that'll come up when you're trying to insert data into orders, and if you have a product ID that doesn't exist in the products table, in SQL Server's world, it would actually give you an error. So that's where these relationships really, really do matter and are a big part of the physical design of how the database works. We'll go ahead and save this. And we're good to go. We have a legitimate database model that we built, and it has been implemented as well in our database. If I go refresh our tables, you'll see that I have more tables in here now. There we go. I have the orders table. So we could fill this up with data. We could build an application. We could actually build systems that rely on this now that we have a basic system here that would take orders for us.